Hello, friends. Welcome back to Market Shares. I'm your host, Tony Blodgett, and today we have something a little bit different. Today, the tables are turned, and I'm going to be interviewed on this podcast. Actually, this is a podcast that my good friend Ken Perry and Kirk Faulkner over at TheKnowledgeCoop did with me. I drove down to their office in Vancouver, Washington. We had a really great meeting and we're able to record this podcast where we talk about a lot of things going back over many years. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. It's a little bit different flavor, but might give you the opportunity to learn a little bit more about me. And I think it's a really great conversation. So I hope you enjoy.
We have got a good friend of mine, Tony Blodgett. So first of all, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks, Ken. Glad to be here.
Dude, I have to tell you guys, I actually got here with a white sweater on and I saw you guys wearing black shirts, and I fortunately had a black shirt under my white sweater, so I feel like I fit in better now.
It is Black Shirt Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this makes me feel better. So that was going to be super awkward.
It would have been awkward. And you might have been warm wearing a sweater in here. So.
I know, totally. It does warm up in studio.
Yeah.
So, dude, we just got to hang out last week at the Master's Coach program, which is always epic.
Yeah.
But we go back a lot further than that. So let's kind of dive into... Actually, I'm going to go different on this. So we typically say, how'd you get in the business? But I happen to know you just did an activity that I want to start with, right? So in lessons from last time, we always go, okay, well, how can we pull lessons out of people? Like what did they learn from difficult times and struggles? And for some people, they haven't thought about difficult times in a long time. And so we start diving in and it's like, oh yeah, I guess that did affect me. But you just did this thing that I've been talking about all day, which is the timeline exercise.
Yeah.
And so that anybody watching or listening to this knows, the timeline is where you basically write your entire life timeline, and all the positive things go above the timeline and all the negative things go below. So I just want to start there. What was that like for you?
Well, I'll tell you. So, when I watched, so this was the Building Champions event, and Daniel Harkavy kind of went through his timeline first. And it
That was so impactful.
It was impactful, and it helped to recognize, he hit on some real personal stuff, and it allowed me to open up and be maybe more personal. But, I actually went back to my room to do that exercise, and we had great rooms at that hotel, right? So it's not like, I was out on the balcony and, I wrote down, I rolled out the sheet of paper with my timeline. You start at birth and you go to present day. And I tried to start on the far left and start remembering all my early childhood memories. And I quickly realized this is going to take forever. And so I started by filling out, some of the highlights, and so for me, it was easier to go, okay, these are the definite positive things that have happened over, my 46 years on earth. And these are the definite, negatives, but as going through those, it made me think about things, to be honest with you, Ken, I hadn't thought about for many, many years, and especially the negative things, right? I think for most of us, when we have bad things happen in life, we tend to try to forget about them. We just move on. And some of us, yeah, I was going to say, some people compartmentalize better than others. And unfortunately, it's one of my superpowers. And so I definitely compartmentalized a lot of the things, but it was emotional, I'll be honest with you, to relive the experiences, and the ones that were the most difficult. There's obvious wins, right? Like career success, financial success. To me, those are easy to identify. There's the negatives, divorce, illness, death of a family member. The more difficult things for me were the way that I felt, I'll give an example. I didn't know this was on the script, but one thing that really made me emotional was, I wrote down that I went through a divorce, and that was difficult enough. Mm-hmm. What was more difficult was the way that my family reacted to it and the interaction that happened with my family. And I don't mean like my kids, because, my ex-wife and my kids and I, always were great. It was the rest of the family and how they dealt with it, which was not very well, and how I felt during that time. And so it was a few of those instances where I thought about how I was made to feel about the circumstances that were going on, not even so much the actual event that that was going on, if that makes sense. And I went deep because, Daniel went deep. And so I actually think that it's an exercise that everyone should go through. And my plan is to roll that back out. I brought it home with me, and I'm going to roll it back out, and I'm going to try to fill in more of it, because I think it's healthy for me, it was a healthy exercise to go through and relive some of those things, and just acknowledge that we've all been through a lot to get to where we're at. And it also, the point of that exercise was then to turn around and create our next 10 years, right? And so anyways, that's what it meant to me. It brought up a lot of stuff.
Was the next 10-year piece, I imagine, was way more fun for you because you're so driven. You're probably one of the most driven people I know in this entire mortgage business. You wake up and it's almost like you're just immediately thinking strategy. You don't waste time. You live hard, play hard. So it's not like you're just this, diving into work constantly, but you don't do anything. It doesn't seem like you do anything by accident.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess I'm very driven by my goals, right? And so when it comes to the mortgage industry, I set goals early on, and, we could talk about, kind of the experiences that I went through when I first got in the mortgage business, but it created a vision for me of what was possible in this industry. And so to me, there's no reason why any individual can't, reach the highest highs that are available in anything that they do. And I've always felt that way about the mortgage industry. And so that's kind of what drives me to move forward, is I think just the goals that I've set. And, it's, for me, it's just a matter of not wanting to have regrets about, what I know that I could have accomplished in my career. And so I think that's probably what drives me. I don't know. I grew up very blue collar, very hardworking family. I mean, we were doing chores from the time that I can remember. We had checklists, for our chores, and, it was just very strong work ethic. And what I found out when I got in the mortgage business is most people don't embody that mindset in mortgage and real estate. I couldn't believe it, to be honest with you. I'm like, wait, so we make how much per transaction? And the average person just does, a couple transactions a month, because I think that they tie it to income. I never tied anything to income. It was never about income. It was about, putting in, if I work 40, 50 hours, just do a good, honest, week's work, right? That was my mindset. And where that propelled me in this industry was really far, because it turns out a lot of people, especially on the sales side of our business, they just don't embody that. They look at numbers, they look at income, and if they feel like they're doing what they need to check those boxes, good
enough is good enough.
Yeah, and if I can take the rest of the week off, then I'll do that, and I've just never really thought that way.
But that characteristic defines your personal life as well. I mean, you practice martial arts, you bought a Jeep, and then you built the crap out of it on your own. You didn't ship it. I mean, I know you had some people do some work on it, but you have the capacity you dedicated yourself to learning enough about how to build out a Jeep for off-roading or overlanding, I guess is what you were really doing. And you did it. And I watched the progress on social media as you kind of went through the process. It's not just work that you're driven in. And driven, I don't even really like that word. It's preoccupied with giving whatever you're deciding to do your complete attention and effort. Driven almost implies some sort of negative connotation, like you forsake your family for your career. You don't do that. You built this compound up north of Seattle that's a playground for your kids and you.
Yeah.
And so it's not forsaking anything. It's just this characteristic that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it.
Well, I think, I said that I'm driven by my goals. I think I'm more driven by my vision, right? So like, I'll use the Jeep as an example. Like, I had a vision of, if I was going to have a Jeep, what was it going to look like? Like what was it going to do, And so then I needed to create that, and it's the same thing with my career. Like, what could it be? What is doable? And then I'm just driven to accomplish what that vision was until I reset, recalibrate, and focus on a new vision. I've built, a couple Jeeps now, and actually opened an off-road shop recently to help other people build Jeeps. Yeah, so I'm more of a financial investor in that, but that emerged as a passion of mine, and and met a gentleman who, had the same passion and had been running, a Jeep customization shop. So I'm like, hey, I like to invest in things that, have a opportunity of success. And so I'm passionate about that. And, they needed an investor. And so here I am in the Jeep business. But it's not something I tend to dedicate, a full amount of my time to. But yeah, something that's fun and cool. But yeah, I think I've always tried to crystallize in my mind, a feeling of what it would be like to be in a certain position, and then I'm kind of drawn towards accomplishing that.
Which
hard
is
to explain.
Fed your interest in martial arts. You didn't just, it could be lessons from dojo time, because the application from either what you've learned growing up in a blue collar family and learned working hard in the mortgage business, or what you learned at a dojo, or what you learned in training with a teacher, is directly applicable to, or directly the result of the way you approach life.
Yeah. Well, so for me with karate, and it was one of those things that I put above the line, I was 10 years old when I got into martial arts. The couple things I put below the line was how bad I was at football and baseball and the other sports, and in my mind, I thought I was really good at them, because in my backyard with my brother, I was really good at football. It was when I got on the field and got leveled by the guys that were twice my size, I realized, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be on the football field. And what I loved about martial arts was that it was it's an individual sport. You obviously work out in a dojo and you work out, but it's really focused on yourself. It's about discipline. It's about inner growth, and you're competing against yourself every day. For me, that was just better than team sports for whatever reason. But as soon as I got in, my vision there was obviously to get my black belt, as I think a lot of people, that is their vision. And so from the time I was 10 years old until I was 16, I trained, almost every day, sometimes twice a day. I went to Junior Olympics when I was 12, but I never reached my black belt. I was an HQ, they call it. So I was a 3rd degree brown belt. I was ready for my black belt test. I was at that age where, I had to start working. I was dating, obviously. I was 16, 17, right? So started dating, started working. I would work after school. I would work on the weekends, and karate was no longer an option. However, there was a time a few years later when I was about 21 years old. I had gone through a relationship breakup, and I'm like, I need something to ground me back into reality, and I needed something physical. And so I actually went back and finished obtaining my black belt when I was 21. And then I was very fortunate I was already in the mortgage business, and I had the financial means to be able to travel to Japan. I was able to actually test for my black belt in Japan, where the original soke of our style of karate was. I met him. He handed me my certificate in person. It was months before he passed away from throat cancer. And then a few years later, I went back. It was 4 years later, and I tested for my my 2nd degree black belt, also in Japan. So both of my black belt, 1st and 2nd degree, I was able to test for in Japan, which was pretty cool.
That's a bit like getting to test for your jiu-jitsu in front of Gracie's or one of the Gracie boys.
Yeah, it was like
cool.
that. And but I think the point being there in that story is that I never lost the vision of wanting to accomplish it. We hit roadblocks, right? And life happened, and I got off course, and I didn't know the path in which I would get back to finalizing, obtaining that. But, that life's funny that way, especially when you are crystal clear on something you want to accomplish. It doesn't always, the path to get there isn't always straight. And for me, I'm just glad it circled back around and worked out, and continued to practice there. And we did a lot of, we trained, we did a lot of competition. I mean, my ex-wife, competition training. So a lot of kids that were going to compete. That was a fun time.
Okay, so this is really interesting. So the first lesson I'm pulling out of this conversation is that vision, right? So vision carries you through.
Yeah.
Because I've never done as much work on cars as you did, but I owned Volkswagens, and so I know, it's one step forward, 18 steps back, and things break.
By definition, if you own a Volkswagen, you bought into the idea of working on cars.
Right. Yeah. So, but as things break, are you telling me that vision, because you've cemented your vision, things can break and you go, that's part of it, but I'm going to get here, and that just keeps you on track?
Yeah. I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way, but a lot of people right now in this market talk about, all the hard times. To me, it's almost like you're on a rail and you might get bumped, but the rail's still moving you in the right direction. I don't get like down about the market or the challenges or what's happening. It's still just pursuit of that future, that vision that you've kind of already casted. It's almost like it's already happened. You just need to get there.
Dude, I want that so bad.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, I had a buddy that built a house and he tore it down to like one wall and then built it back up. So he bought a foreclosed house, tore it down, and we were walking through it as like a few walls had been put up. And he goes, over here we're gonna do this, and over here we're gonna do that, and he may as well have been speaking another language because I'm like, oh, cool. I couldn't see anything. Like once he built it, I'm like, this is amazing. But up until then, I knew he could see it, and I don't know. Can I obtain that ability, or has that just always been a thing for you?
Well, what's funny about it is, and I don't, I talk about vision a lot, but I actually, a lot of people can like see things mentally. Like I cannot create mental pictures in my head. I never have been able to. And I don't know why that is, but I can't. But what I am really good at is, and same thing like with my house. My house was a foreclosure. It was, completely overgrown and looked, I mean, if you see my house now, they call it the compound. We were able to over time, build it into what my dream home, right? With a swimming pool and all this stuff, it all just kind of came together. And when I saw the place, it sat on the market for 883 days. It's not like no one had a chance to buy this house. But I was able to get it, it was during a depressed time. It was in foreclosure. And we turned it into something, really cool. My property next door, I wanted to buy the property next door to me. And I had reached out to the gentleman. It was completely overgrown. He had logged it. It had stumps everywhere. And I envisioned a pasture, next door where we could have, our hobby farm. And if you look next door to me today, I own that property. I rent it out. It took me 3 years to clear all the property, but it's exactly as I kind of, one evening I was like, this would be amazing if we could make this happen. And then I guess it just starts there with, same thing. I own a Volkswagen. I had a Volkswagen when I was a kid, and I wanted a '63 ragtop. I'm like, how can I get to that? And I ended up with a '62 ragtop, but I have a '62 ragtop, and but it's one of those things. You plant the seeds, and it sounds kind of woo woo, but that's just the way that for me life has worked out. And you have the vision, you have you really, it's like you put the stake in the ground, and it's like, that's where I'm going to get to. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but, and
I don't even know exactly what it's going to look like when I get there.
And that's okay.
Yep, exactly.
And I don't, yeah, exactly. So
I think if there's a common theme from the podcast so far, for me, the terminology I use is getting back up. Mm-hmm. It's not about some linear path to success that everybody's taken. Nobody has. Everyone we've talked to has had some sort of get back up story, which you have as well. If that's the common theme, then tell me about a time, business or professional, where you got the chair kicked out from under you. Not just a down market, because everybody's experience right now rates at 8% or whatever they're at today.
Yeah.
When did you feel like you totally got the, professionally or personally got the chair kicked out from underneath you?
Well, I think the very worst time was when, we got to the point where we had to sell Mortgage Advisory Group. That was probably, it was something that I took as a personal business failure, because I was the president and COO of the company. I think that, it was a very difficult time. It was 2013. We sold it in 2014. But 2013 was really the year that took the wind out of our sails. And I think it was a time where you saw a lot of small independent mortgage companies, going under, because the regulatory environment had just gotten so difficult. The requirements for your net worth and what was necessary to be considered a strong counterparty with your warehouse lenders and with your correspondent relationships. And just those pressures were very difficult for a small to mid-sized independent mortgage company. And there was other factors that had nothing to do with me, right? I mean, but that was probably the one thing when we determined that, you know what, we either need to raise capital or we need to sell to another company, you know, essentially be bought out. And that was for me probably the biggest business failure. Now it all turned out okay, you know, as things always do. But I took that one personal. I still today felt like, you know, had some things been, you know, gone a different way for us, you know, we could be one of the top lenders. We made it through the crash. I mean, you know, that was a lot to be said, to be that kind of a company and make it through the crash. We pivoted, we got our eagle, you know, we started doing more FHA business, which, as you guys probably know, the FHA went from basically 0 market share before the crash to about 55% market share. We had loan officers lined up down the street to come work for us because we were one of the small independent mortgage companies that actually had our eagle. And you know, we made that pivot at the right time. And so you look at the successes we had, you would have thought, but it really just came down to dollars and cents. And, you know, and I think a lot of companies are going through this right now is, do you want to invest the additional dollars? Do you want to put more capital at risk in order to potentially come out the other side of this? And for us, the answer was no. And it wasn't wholly my decision. There was 2 owners of the company, but I ran the day to day. So for me, that was, you know, a big personal. That was the thing I took the most personal, probably hit me the hardest. And then the fallout from that, you know, like your team's perception of you and the decisions that you made, the industry's, you know, perception of you and the decisions that you made. Like,
or if you're like me, it's your perception of your team's
well,
perception of you,
maybe
or your perception of the industry's
maybe
perception.
We're harder on ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the time I think about the most, for sure.
Being that there's a lot of people going through that right now, like you said, how did you get back up after that? Because I know, I mean, I have friends losing companies. So what would you tell them right now based on what you had learned through that? Does it just suck for a while and hang in there, or?
So the first thing is that recognize that, so I never looked for a plan B until, you know, I'm riding this thing out. I felt like it was my personal responsibility. I was the president of the board. My responsibility was to the shareholders and to the organization as a whole. So the first thing I think that you need to, if you're going to shut down a company or sell a company or unwind it, you just got to do things right. There's a lot of wrong ways to do it, and those will leave you legacy issues for years to come. So you just have to do the right thing. There's certain things you can't do. You know, if you feel like your company is insolvent, you have to make decisions that are right by your creditors, that are right by your other, you know, counterparty relationships. And so without getting into specifics, I would say do the right thing as you face potentially having to, you know, wind down an organization, because otherwise you can have, you know, the IRS, you can have, you know, other, you know, litigation coming after you forever, especially if you know, take money out of the if you take money out of an insolvent organization and you don't follow the proper waterfalls of where those funds should go first, you're going to find yourself in a big problem. So we were very by the book about that. And that helped a lot. It didn't fix the problem, but allowed us to sleep at night and know that, you know, as we move on, we did all that we could do, and we did it the right way.
Reputationally, those you might have feared thought poorly of you actually didn't, because you did it the right way.
That's right. And so I think that's a big thing that I would tell, because your inclination is I got to protect my family. I got to, you know, and you think about the financial impact of that. And when you own a mortgage company, you have money tied up, whether you're doing well or not, but it's not your money, you know? And so anyway, so I would say that would be the first thing. And then, you know, for me, it's what led me to the company I'm at today. This is only my 3rd mortgage company in 26 years.
I never even thought about that. But
it led me to the opportunity at New American Funding. And I had to recognize that, because look, I was the president and COO. I loved that job. Like that was my dream job. I wanted to run a mortgage company since probably before I got in the mortgage company. You know, my dad owned a mortgage company. And so I always wanted to run a mortgage company. I thought that was my destiny, working for my dad's company. And that didn't work out, which I don't know how much time we have, but we could go into that. But that was what I always wanted to do. So that was my dream job, you know. And so what I would tell people is recognize, and I knew that going and just moving to another company as their president and COO was probably not going to happen. And I had to be okay with taking a lower role in the industry in order to reestablish myself. And I chose a company that I believed in. I met the people, and I thought, I can grow within this organization. And so I did. I took a step back, if you will, but I also plugged into a much larger, much more mature organization. And so this time, as I've grown through the ranks and I'm, at the executive level now today, it actually means, I don't want to say more, but it means almost more to me than what I accomplished there by doing it with an organization that's the size that we are, with the sophistication that we are. So be willing to maybe take a step back and reorganize. Doesn't mean you got to lose track of the vision. I'm still was driven towards executive leadership once I made the move, but I had to start by rebuilding a sales team and an ops team. You know what I mean? You had to kind of take a step back, and that's okay. For me, it worked out well. And for the last, it'll be 10 years now that since I joined New American Funding, and I've kind of gotten back. I'm not the president and COO, but an organization our size, the table that I sit at and the influence that I have is, probably more so than even what I had before.
Well, NAF is still a privately held company owned by a husband and wife team. So president and COO are, that's rare air in a company like that.
Exactly. So,
and I think, Ken and I both are big fans of Ryan Holiday, and one of his most famous books is The Obstacles the Way. I think that phrase describes so many people like yourself that have found a way through the wilderness back to a place of prominence and significance. Forget about the money, forget about the title. It's back to doing something that you really love, that energizes you, that drives you to get up every day and succeed. That obstacle became the way, and then here you are, albeit in a crappy market. But is it really a crappy market? It's just the market. This is what the mortgage business always does, right?
Yeah. One thing I tell salespeople all the time is that the market does not dictate our success. And I truly believe that it doesn't. It might dictate the amount of effort we need to put in. It might dictate the amount of, skills we need to hone, or how good we are at the job that we do. But at the end of the day, go pull up your county recordings and see how many transactions are happening. And there's enough that would keep your business if you got your fair share, or maybe more than your fair share. There's nothing wrong with getting. Sometimes you need to get more than your fair share to meet your goals or your needs in a particular market. So, but at the end of the day, you can't blame the market for the success you're having. The market is going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to do what it's going to do to certain people, and other people are going to rise above it. So I think that's a cop out. Now look. Does my income go down when the market changes? Yeah, absolutely, it does. But I don't blame the market for it. I say, look, what do I need to do different in this market to get back to where I want or need to be?
Okay, you opened a window, and I'm going to dive right into it.
Yeah.
So you witnessed your dad in mortgage.
Yes.
And that company did not succeed. It shut down, or was it?
No, well, yeah. So it shut down years after I left there. I mean, he retired basically and shut it down. No, his company was really successful. It's a different. My dad took a different approach than most people in the mortgage industry, which is, we had one store. He's like one store. Small team. We underwrite all of our own loans. We insure. He's a real mortgage banker through and through. That's how I was taught this business, which is why, I think I embody a lot of those, ideas, but I didn't, that's what I knew, was the underwriters down the hallway. You have enough net worth that you can insure your own loans with HUD and do that. So that's the way that he did business. And it was a great company. The reason why I left my dad's company was that, we just didn't see eye to eye. He got in the business in, I think the late 70s, early 80s. And, he embodied a lot of the ideas that were from the 80s, and when I got in the mortgage business in 1997, 60 days after I got in the mortgage business, I was sitting at a Todd Duncan sales mastery event at 20 years old going, oh, that's what's possible in this industry, you know? And that's what I meant by that vision that was casted by me, you know, very early on, literally 60, 90 days after I got in the mortgage business. You know, I met the likes of Stephen Marshall and Barry Habib and Tim Brahim and those guys. You know, obviously didn't know them. I'd sat in the audience in awe of the success that they had and felt like, you know, hey, someday, you know, why couldn't I do that? But by going to those events, bringing in these ideas of, you know, like a mortgage company providing a database and a marketing system and all the things that are now kind of table stakes in today's world, you know, my dad looked at those things and said, I don't think that you understand the economics of how the mortgage banking works. And I'm like, yeah, but these are the things that our competitors are doing, and this is what we need to do. And he, you know, so we battled against that a lot to the point where, you know, it was not great for our relationship. And so I finally got after 9 years and said, look, you know, maybe what's best for me is to just go on my own. So I learned a lot. You know, I left there in 2006, and that's when I joined Mortgage Advisory Group. Went there just as a loan officer. I said, I don't even want, you know, I was the vice president of retail lending for my dad's company, which isn't saying a lot. It's a small little company, but you know,
it's a cool name,
but it's a very cool name.
Yeah.
Basically, I was the branch manager. You know, I ran the sales team, which was awesome. You know, I was 27 or 28 years old. But when I went to Mortgage Advisory Group, I said, look, I don't want to be a manager. I just want to just do loans. You know, I'm just going to kind of take a step back and just focus on doing loans. But what I did there really well is I got to know all the people that worked there. All loan officers became my friends. All the ops people became my friends. And so when that company started growing, it was just natural for me to take on a leadership role because I'd kind of already put myself into that position without asking for the job title. And that's a theme too, I think, in my career is, you know, act as if, you know, just don't ask, you know, so many people are like, well, you didn't tell me I did a good job, or you didn't, you know, it's just, you know, do the good job and then people will recognize. You don't have to, no one needs to invite you in, you know, invite yourself in, you know, and that's how I've always acted as if, and then let it known that, you know, my intentions, you know, so, hey, if there was an opportunity to be a sales manager, I would be very interested in doing that. In the meantime, I'm going to act as if I already have that job.
Patterns repeat themselves. You know, you leave your dad's company and you take this lesser position at Mortgage Advisory Group, and you build that up and you become part of the stakeholder Mortgage Advisory Group. Then you leave that company and you take a great role, but a slightly diminished role at New American Funding. And the same process repeats itself. And now you're back to where you were at Mortgage Advisory Group, only then some.
Yeah. Well, when you put it that way, that's exactly what's happened. So, but I do think that, you know, I've mentored some young people and I've shared that with them is, you know, I think that you don't always need to be invited to the next step. I think you need to make your intention known that I want growth, but you don't need to wait for the growth. You can act as if, you know, and then people will recognize that. And if they know what your intention is, and you show through your actions that you deserve it, you know, those opportunities will present themselves. And if not, maybe you're just surrounded by the wrong people. I mean, you got to make good choices with your careers on the people you surround yourself with. And the other thing I would say is in 26 years, I've never had a promotion or a raise that I didn't ask for or make known that I was interested in. Mm-hmm. You know, no one's just going to pick you out of the crowd and say, hey, you know, I think you should get promoted today.
Oprah's not calling.
No, you know, and that's okay. I don't like have resentment around that. To me, it's like, it's a life lesson. It's like, you got to let people know where you're interested in going. So and plant that seed so that when the opportunity, they go, you know what, Ken had mentioned that he's interested in that role. Maybe we should consider him for that role, you know? And look, he's already garnered the attention of others and he's leading by example and so on and so forth. And so to me, that's how I've, you know, grown my career.
Well, it's funny because I've worked with some of our guests on the podcast before, but I've never worked for any of our guests on the podcast before. And I actually reported to Tony for the last stint in my mortgage career. And what I want to call to attention is the fact that normally with a person like you are driven. You get that hard charger reputation, right? And you come from the sales side of the equation, even though you did manage and most people see you coming from the sales side of the equation. The most doggedly loyal ops crew is with you now for how many years? I mean,
some 20, 50.
And not just because you're good to them. They are super talented. They are very employable elsewhere if they wanted to be. This is just a solid, smart, capable crew. And they've stayed with you through some challenges, you talk about surrounding yourself with good people. You have an incredible group of very loyal people who have stayed with you in the region. I realize their role isn't global with New American Funding, but here in the region, they make stuff happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've helped make me successful. I mean, I give most of the credit. I mean, I never could have recruited the people that I did and then have them stay if you don't have, great operations. And so, absolutely, it's been a key to my success to be able to plug in, and I was able to bring a lot of those people with me, not day one, but over time, kind of reassemble the team, if you will. Yeah. So most of my ops team we worked together at Mortgage Advisory Group and brought them over to New American Funding after that whole thing went sideways. So
I have a question for you. So I keep using the word driven because I still love it, but how, as a leader, right? First of all, having people on your team for that long is commendable because it's rare. There's only a few leaders that can say they brought their team with them, and that they've stayed strong as a team. I'm trying to phrase this to not be offensive. I'm not going to do it. You can be a little intimidating with your intensity and drive for success. Like you want
hearing
success.
that from people. Like it's so weird to me.
You want success and you will get success, and people know that. And I wonder, are people drawn to you because they know that they also want success, which is why it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. They follow you because they know where you're going. You have a vision. You know where you're going. They see that. They know that you know where you're going. I wonder if people who aren't driven aren't attracted to working for you because they know it's going to require them to be their best.
I don't know the answer to that. It's funny you say that I'm intimidating because I've heard that from so many times, and I'm like, really? I just don't feel that way about myself. Like I don't know. I don't see myself that way, and so maybe that's some work I need to do. But I think that the reason why our team has stuck together for so long is partly because, I think that they know that we're going to be successful. With operations people, a lot of it's about job security. And I've always been the person who, especially for my core team, we're going to make sure that you're taken care of one way or the other. Like I'm going to make that happen. And I think that there is a strong belief that I'm going to deliver on that commitment. And luckily I've been able to do that, for a long period of time. So I have to imagine that's part of it, but also over time, you just build friendships. Look, I don't micromanage people, despite what people might think from my intimidating nature. I'm not a micromanager. I hire people that I think are the very best at the job, and when they show me that they can be the best at the job, I let them do the job. I'm not. I hire people and get out of their way. I don't know if it was Steve Jobs. Someone said that, some famous person. It's a famous deal. Like hire the right people and get out of their way. Mm-hmm. I'm very much that person. Now, obviously, when things get off track or they're not going well, then as a leader, you have to then step in. But I tend to be the person who gives people enough rope to hang themselves. And I give you enough rope that if you hang yourself, you probably, it's probably over at that point.
I think we can call this Nick Saban syndrome. So intimidating or whatever, Nick Saban was quoted as saying, high achieving people don't really enjoy hanging around low or mediocre achieving people, and mediocre achieving people don't really like hanging around high achieving people. And he wasn't making a judgment statement when he said it. He just said, I'm coaching Alabama. The expectations are here. And if I don't operate here, I'm not going to get the talent that's going to take us to, I don't know how many national championships or whatever. And I think that's maybe what gets interpreted as intimidation is you have standards and you have expectations. But I will tell you that doggedly loyal team, and I worked for you. I didn't get micromanaged. Times where I didn't carry the freight the way I should have, but I didn't get micromanaged. And I never saw that throughout the organization.
I think that I probably do have a different level of, with the operations team, there is a higher expectation on performance for me because when I hire a loan officer, like they're my client is the way I look at it. And my operations team and myself and, our job is to support our salespeople. Now, if they're disrespectful, that's a different thing. Like we have a zero tolerance for that. But sure. Because when it comes to loan officers and their production, like I want to coach them along and I want to encourage them. But if they don't want to do a bunch of loans, I'm not the kind of person who says I only have top producers on my team. Like every loan's important. And if you're a lower producer, but you're not high maintenance, I'm not going to get all up in your grill. Now if you're a low producer and you're high maintenance and you're difficult and you talk badly to my operations team, you're probably not going to work there for me very long. So we do have very high standards for our ops team. And it's really as simple as service levels. We just really focus on, good communication, meeting service levels. So I would say that I do have a different level of expectation. Like you could look at some of my loan officers and be like, man, you don't really hold them accountable to high production. I'm like, that's not my job. I feel like if they want to do
they're commission only sales.
They're commission only sales. I mean, as long as you're additive, I think of drag versus lift. Are you bringing lift to the organization? If you do one loan a month, that's bringing lift, as long as you're not doing one loan a month and taking 10 times
down morale.
The amount of, operations support that you should. So I take a little different approach there. And that seems to work well for me too. I'm not, I want to give training. I want to give coaching. I want to give support. I want to give ideas and inspiration. But if someone doesn't want to do it, I guess that's their choice, and their paycheck will reflect that.
Absolutely.
I want to jump back onto the timeline. So in talking about the next 10 years, right? We have a lot of people in the industry, and you and I have seen it, who are, that stay alive till 25 thing, where it's like, let's just not die. And as we know, we're all football fans, prevent defense actually never works.
Yeah.
And so when you look at your next 10 years, being in the same market as somebody saying, let's just try and not die, what does your next 10 years look like?
So I actually see this market as opportunity, and a lot of the reason why I can have my perspective on the next 10 years is because, in my opinion, the organization that I work for, I think they're positioned to be able to capitalize on what's going on in the market. They made a very smart decision to retain servicing, back in 2012, 13, 14, open our own servicing company in 2015. We have $70 billion of servicing that's completely unlevered. And
who knew that would be the best decision ever?
Right.
That's huge.
Well, and I don't, I know that, I know that they knew it would be a good hedge against production, right? Yeah. So if you talk to Rick Arviello, he would tell you, servicing is the best hedge you could have against origination. And look, we're in a time where originations drop, through the floor, and we have the best hedge you could have against origination. And so from that perspective, that's great, because that covers the bills, even if your origination side of the business is losing money. And it allows you to have, you don't spend every day worrying about, are we going to stay in business? So then you can focus on offense and growth. And that's exactly what we're doing. Now, with that being said, Ken, I think that things are going to continue to get squeezed in the mortgage industry from a total margin available perspective. And so in order to be successful in the next 10 years, driving down your origination costs is an absolute necessity. I think that you're already starting to see some loan officer compression, loan officer compensation compression. I think it's kind of happening naturally. A lot of loan officers are choosing to lower their compensation. They want lower costs. They want better pricing, so on and so forth. So I think that the industry is kind of creating that itself, because there's not one mortgage company out there that I know of that wants to be the first to say, we're going to lower loan officer comp and it's going to be good for you. But you are seeing it naturally squeeze down, because some, and it's happening slowly, but I think that continues to compress over time. But I think as an organization, we have to also be innovative in finding ways of driving down our costs. And there's some areas where costs have expanded significantly if you're doing the right thing. And mostly it's around, as you would probably know, cybersecurity and just overall, compliance and security is a huge, huge thing. And the regulation that's coming forth, state by state by state, led by states like New York and the like. I mean, for a company our size, with the amount of borrower personal data that we have, it's not just protecting the data, it's being able to give a borrower access to their data. It's being able to release data if someone wants you to give it back to them. All those things sound maybe not too difficult in practice, but in reality, they're very difficult and expensive to build systems and processes that are going to meet really meet the requirements of today, but also the requirements that we see coming forward. So there's so you have to drive. My point being is that you have to drive down the what you would think of traditional origination expenses, processing, underwriting, things like that, while maybe having to spend even more in other areas of cybersecurity and
Compliance.
and compliance and things like that. Especially as you see AI come on and more potential vulnerabilities to your systems and whatnot. So
you can just hear it in his voice, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, he's already thought of this stuff. He's already got a plan. He's got a vision for how we're going to do this.
I'm so shocked.
He's dealt with every single potential risk. I mean,
so let me say this. I'm not. This is not an ad for New American Funding, and I don't work there anymore. But I will say it's a thrill to have you here because I just enjoyed the heck out of working with you and getting to know you, and the fact that our friendship remains posthumously is just great to me. Always one of the people I call when I've got a question or wonder what's going on in the industry. I always call Tony. He's always generous with his time, as he is here today. So let me say this. If somebody wanted to get a hold of Tony Blodgett, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so this is awesome being on your podcast. As you guys know, I have my own podcast. It's called Market Shares, and we have a Instagram page. I would just hit me up on Market Shares is probably the easiest place to find me. And
I'm guessing if they Google Tony Blodgett, they might find your face.
Or Tony Blodgett. If you just put my name in there, I bet my phone number pops up, and you can text me too.
There you go.
that's so funny. I think I was in the room when you decided on the name of Market Shares. It was in Arizona that we had, you were looking at a different name, and then I think Market Shares.
So Julian Hebron, is that how you pronounce his name? With the basis point.
Uh-huh.
So Julian, so I started, when I first started the podcast, I wanted to call it Basis Points. That was the name.
I like it.
And then I realized that there's already the basis point out there, and this might be a conflict. And so I reached out to our mutual friend, Dave Savage, and I said, Julian, because I didn't know it's Julian. I just listened to him and watched his stuff. And I go, do you think this would be a conflict? He goes, well, sounds like it could be a conflict. And he goes, but why don't you call Julian? I said, you got his number? And so I did reach out to Julian, and he said, personally, I don't have a problem with it, but I think my attorneys might. And he goes, so I would appreciate if you didn't use that name, mm-hmm. and you'd probably appreciate if you didn't use that name, but let me help you come up with something else.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so Julian, and he did, he spent a couple days and he called me and he's like, Tony, I got the perfect name of a podcast. He goes, I thought about it all weekend. I was going to go register this domain as my own, but I'm going to give it to you. And he goes, it's like a triple entendre. And I'm like, really? And he goes, and he told me it's Market Shares. And so to me, Market Shares right now, it's our podcast, but it really could be an opportunity to share, almost like Keeping Current Matters, right? Like come up with a platform of, not to compete against Keeping Current Matters, but I'm saying Market Shares is as if like a service to share information about the market.
Collaboration.
We do a little bit of that, but not a lot. Training on how to build market share and then just market share, like sharing interviews and sharing. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so he was like, this is a really cool name. And I said, man, if you're cool with it, I'm going to take that name. So Julian gets all the credit for the Market Shares name. I immediately went on, I registered the domain name. So you can actually just go to marketshares.com and it'll direct you to our YouTube page. So,
all right, last question, back to your timeline. If you were to go back to 14-year-old Tony Blodgett on that timeline, and knowing what you know now from all the experiences that you have had, what's the one thing you would tell 14-year-old Tony Blodgett?
I think it has to just be clear in your vision, and steadfast. I think that make sure that you're creating the vision of what you really want. Because in my experience, you're going to create what you put your mind to. So don't think small, but also don't not take the time to think through where you want to go. It's super important that you visualize and set a goal on where you want to be. You know how people, will write down an income goal, like, I want to make, $50,000, $100,000. I always would kick myself because every time I wrote down a goal, I accomplished it. And I was like, if I would have just made it bigger, so don't set such big goals, but don't be afraid to set a vision for yourself or your kids or your family or any of it, all of it we have influence over. And so have that vision, be steadfast, and trust that the world will work itself out if you just stay focused on accomplishing the goal.
Well, dude, I can tell you that every time we do a podcast interview, as I'm talking to somebody, I'm thinking, okay, that's going to be great for this person. And that's, I'm thinking about the person that needs to hear this. I needed to hear that. So, dude, I appreciate you coming in, and this has been an awesome conversation. We'll see you in market shares.
Right on. Thanks, guys.